Welcome to Question Time. Tonight we're in Newcastle. On tonight's panel, Matt Vickers, elected in 2019, one of the new crop of Conservative MPs in the northeast of England, recently appointed as a parliamentary aide at the Home Office. Thangam Debbonaire, Labour's shadow leader of the Commons and former shadow housing secretary. Alison Thewliss, Treasury spokesperson for the SNP at Westminster and an MP since 2015. Journalist, commentator and co-convenor of the debate forum Battle of Ideas Festival, Ella Whelan, and managing director of the supermarket chain Iceland, environmental campaigner and author of The Green Grocer, Richard Walker. Good evening. Welcome to my panel. Welcome to the audience here in Newcastle. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home as well. Do join in the conversation on social media in the usual way at BBC Question Time, and we'll see what you've got to say about tonight's topics. And to that end, let's have our first question from Steph Colwell.
What picture does it paint to the general public now that two of Boris Johnson's ethics advisers have resigned?
Matt, I'm going to start with you. What picture does it paint?
I think they both resigned for very different reasons, I think, by all accounts. I don't know the ins and outs of why that resignation occurred. We've seen the statement from Number 10 on it today. There's a suggestion it relates to subsidies on steel. Actually, people in my part of the world will be very happy to hear that there's still subsidies being put in there in efforts to protect British jobs. But actually, I don't know the ins and outs. And, you know,
and what picture does it paint, do you think? That's the question Steph's asking.
I think, do you know what, we can make an assessment of why somebody's resigned when we know a bit more than I know, and probably a bit more than we all know at this point in time.
I mean, he's talked about being put in an impossible and odious position, and that the Prime Minister's behaviour was an affront.
And we're going to go with the next question. The next question doesn't relate to
I was just going to say. I'm just wondering, with descriptions like that, even if it's not entirely clear, the final thing that made him resign, when he uses words like that, what picture do you think it paints?
I think it's very difficult to assess something from what we've seen of that discussion and what it was about. But you know what, if he's out there fighting for British jobs in the steel industry, I think people from our part of the world might be quite happy.
Thangam.
I mean, the thing is, to lose one ethics advisor is careless, but to lose two smacks of something much more serious, and that's what's really worrying. It's really problematic when an ethics advisor, who is clearly, from the tone of his letter to the Prime Minister, been gritting his teeth for the last few months and hanging on in there and trying to stick with it, when actually we get to the end of this week, when he's had a very tough week, a grilling from a parliamentary committee, and tried really hard to stick with the job because he's clearly a man of principle. But his principles have led him to the belief that he was put, as Fiona said, in an odious and impossible position. That's what he said. Now, he also said that this was the last in several incidents. And I think when you've got a government who is prepared to put their own ethics advisor in such an impossible position, not once, not twice, but several times, that says all you need to know about the leadership at the top of this government. I'm afraid to say I really can't see how Boris Johnson is actually going to recruit another ethics advisor. But oh no, I realised on the train up what he's going to do. He's not going to. He is apparently going to redraw the whole idea of that role, which is quite an extraordinary thing to do. A truly ethical and moral Prime Minister would have nothing to fear from a strong-minded, independent ethics advisor.
Steph, you asked the question. What's your view?
So, to be clear, the picture that it paints to me is that his behaviours and his words are not to be trusted and are not ethical.
OK. Woman here in the front.
Matt, I was born and raised within your constituency. I am from the People's Republic of Teesside and went to Bishopsgarth School, you know, all from there. And my family continue to live in that area. Raised under Thatcher's government and everything that came with that. I do not think that there was one person who lives in your constituency that would be glad to see investment in steel over having a completely immoral Prime Minister who does not even know how to lie straight in bed, let alone be able to say that the lies he's saying will bring investment to them for their jobs.
I'll come back to that. Woman here in the front, yes.
I think that, following on from Partygate, it does beg the question about Boris Johnson's integrity.
All right, the man in the suit in the middle there.
I would like to make a point that Boris Johnson may have been broken the ministerial code. And what I would like to ask is, does everybody understand what the ministerial code actually is? Because apparently he hasn't broken it, but then apparently he has. And I would just like to bring that in.
OK. Well, the Ministerial Code outlines a number of things. For example, that ministers should declare self-interest, that they have to obey the law, that they have to abide by the Nolan principles. I mean, I could go on at length, but there's a whole list of things that the Ministerial Code suggests. And what Lord Geidt has said today is, or in the letter that we've seen, is the idea that a Prime Minister might to any degree be in the business of deliberately breaching his own code, i.e. the Ministerial Code is an affront. I can have no part in this. Richard.
Maybe it'll be third time lucky. I don't know. I mean, it is a bit embarrassing. It's far from ideal. However, the reality is they had their vote and he got through it. And I think that the problem is we can't keep endlessly discussing it, you know, whichever side of the debate you're on. The reality is, and hopefully we'll talk about it in more detail, we have a cost of living crisis. We need to get a grip on our debt.
But nonetheless, Richard, you're being asked a question by Steph. That's why you're here, which is what picture does it paint to the public now two ethics advisors to Boris Johnson have resigned? So what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, it's far from ideal. And you know, we do need to try and move on and get through it, and hopefully we can focus on the important issues facing all of us. But it's
But
a bit
unfortunately,
embarrassing.
Richard, if you have someone who is such a stranger to truth and such a complete enemy of ethical behaviour, having that person in charge of the cost of living crisis is in itself deeply worrying.
Isn't this a bit tricky for you, though, Thangam? Because Lord Geidt has not explained in detail why the final thing that has made him resign. We've heard from Boris Johnson that it concerns the extensions of tariffs on steel, which Labour have supported and called for tariffs to be extended again. So why are you so up in arms
because
about
we
this?
don't know what aspect of the ministerial code Lord Geidt has been referring to. Now, it may have been that the frame was about steel, but actually the ministerial code is about whether or not you're showing preferential interests to your friends or whether or not one of your ministers is. It covers that. We don't yet know whether that's actually what's in there.
Well, you know, I think it probably tells you a lot that you would take a stand not over a substantial issue like, you know, subsidies on steel or, you know, a greater question production in the economy or, you know, big things, policies, what you're going to do with the cost of living crisis, holding the government to account for what they did throughout the pandemic. And instead, there's this reliance within Westminster, in the Westminster bubble of politicians, of trying to get at each other, both within the Tory party and, you know, in the opposition, of trying to get at each other on these questions, or important questions of ethics and morality or behaviour. But I think, I don't know if people will agree with me, but I'm relatively bored of it by now. I mean, if you thought that Boris Johnson was a saint when he got voted in 2019, I think you need your head checked because, you know, his track record spoke otherwise. And that's not to make a virtue, by the way, out of a politician, you know, Prime Minister being somewhat, you know, allegedly ethically dubious or, you know, being sort of liberal with the truth. But it's to say that I want this government, and in particular I want Boris Johnson, held to account over the policy decisions he's made or failed to make in relation to the, you know, what the fact that people are choosing between heating and eating at the moment, the fact that lots of people are not able to make their wages meet their needs in terms of their family life or their leisure time, or, you know, questions about what he's done in relation to things like, you know, the crisis in fuel, about green policies, about the lockdown policies, about civil liberties, what this government's doing to free speech in this country with crackdowns on protests, Rwanda policy. I mean, the list goes on. Do something substantial, oppose in a substantial way. I'm just really sick and tired of this kind of slightly kind of infantile infighting within Westminster. Ethics are important, but, I mean, it's been Partygate, there's a no-confidence vote. When just as a last point, it's also slightly depressing and disappointing that Conservative MPs can't get it together to give a decent answer now. I mean, I know this news has only broke this morning, but Christ, I get briefed better than this in sort of small magazines that I work for. Come up, you know, figure out, it just shows a government that does not know where it's headed. You know, the quote about not being able to lie straight is a good one. But they're also not able to, you know, converse internally, talk about strategy, get a kind of position together. And I think that tells you a lot.
Matt, I will come back to you, but let's hear some more from our audience. Young woman there in the middle, in the stripy shirt, yes.
I think for an elected representative, a Prime Minister, nonetheless, to have so blatantly broken the own rules that he set is just an absolute disgrace, and that should be a government that does not continue. Personally, I work for the National Health Service as a cleaner. My mum works as an ICU nurse. She's my inspiration. And all throughout COVID, she was holding up iPads while people died in front of her and her colleagues, and they deal with that trauma every day. So for the Prime Minister to have been like, well, we'll just have a party, I suppose, it doesn't really matter. I'm only leading one of the most influential countries in the entire world with citizens that work really hard. I want to know why you supported Prime Minister Boris Johnson throughout this process, if you don't mind me, Mr Vickers.
OK, I will come back to you. I need to get around the panel. Does anyone here want to speak? Because we've had a lot from the audience, a lot of dismay, shall I put it, with what's happened today with the Prime Minister. Does anyone want to speak up for the Prime Minister? There's lots. Right, woman at the back. So there's a lot of Conservative voters here. Yes.
I'd just like to say, could we remind ourselves, most people who voted for Boris voted for him because he is a maverick. He is different. He doesn't do things by the rule book or the book, whatever book it is. And if you did think he did before you voted for him, well, then you must believe in fairies. He got a job done. He's been given a difficult shift. Nobody predicted the pandemic, the way through it. There wasn't a book written about how to do it. Sorry, but I think he's done OK.
All right. The man there at the back in the white shirt with a blue jacket, yes.
I think we're forgetting that also in the same week as this has happened, we have Keir Starmer being investigated for questionable ethics too, charging £2,500 an hour for legal advice or getting an advance on a book deal. And I think...
Yes, so I think that what the allegation is there is that he was late in declaring the interest.
But still not ethically right in our minds, possibly. What I would say is, we're sick of Beergate, sick of Partygate. We care what's happening in our own gates. Can people get on with governing our country and finally getting out of the problems we're in?
Alison.
Yeah, and I think lots of people would move on from that. I think the point that was made by the lady whose mum's a nurse is that lots of people can't. Lots of people know exactly what they sacrificed. They know exactly what they gave up during COVID. I've had constituents of mine getting in touch who were working in hospitals, had to bar the doors as people banged in the door to say goodbye to their loved ones. While you had the Prime Minister partying up in Downing Street, having parties to say goodbye to civil servants when people couldn't actually say goodbye to their loved ones.
But nonetheless, that Lord Geidt did not resign over that, and he did not resign over party. He's resigned over something else. He's not explained what it is. The Prime Minister has given his explanation as to what it is.
Yes, and there's some suggestion that I saw mentioned on the press earlier on that it's less about the steel industry, more about steel donations that Boris Johnson and his ministers
Of course, we don't know that at all.
And we won't know, but we will, I'm sure, in due course, find out, because all of these things come out in the wash eventually. But this scandal is just following the government around. It is bogged down in this scandal. It can't move on because people can't move on. And I think the only way for the Conservative Party to do anything about that is to get rid of Boris Johnson, and they failed to do so last week.
Man here in the front, a suit and tie.
I think the thing with Partygate is it feels like he was in there kind of laughing at us working class people who were just going about. We weren't seeing family. I had my mum going to see my nana through a window in a nursing home. And when she did get to go and see it all masked up and stuff, and he was in there partying up with friends, mixing, no social distancing. And I just think, to be honest, it's a disgrace. Some things are inexcusable, and that is inexcusable.
OK. The man here at the front. Hang on, we'll just get a microphone to you. Hang on.
I had this conversation at work today, and basically I asked members of staff at work who didn't break COVID rules. And bar none, everybody broke COVID rules in one way, shape or another. The 20 minutes walk went to an hour. Nicola Sturgeon takes a mask off, caught twice, on 2 occasions where a mask off. Keir Starmer caught with the mask off. Everybody's broke the rules over a period of time, but it just seems to be dragging on and dragging on and dragging on around this Partygate. Can it please just stop and let's move on to more? Prioritise the country, not prioritise Boris fashion.
Ella, you want to come?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because, you know, Boris Johnson at this point is, I think, relatively indefensible, not just because he broke the rules, because it was that kind of sense of, you know, politicians decided that they could make up their own minds on what was a sensible level of risk or breaking rules or following rules, and the rest of us plebs couldn't. So we just had to have police chasing us across parks, telling us to go home, and, you know, everything under the sun being illegal. But, you know, moving on from Partygate, which I really agree with you, I think we should do, the question is, which angers you more? Which are you more worried about returning in the future? you know, puking in number 10 and, you know, bad behaviour and rule breaking or whatever it is, or the policies themselves in which we saw, particularly towards the latter end of the pandemic, when we were feeling the benefits of the vaccine and the emergency period of the pandemic was over, still crackdown, still, you know, heinous treatment of people in care homes and inhumane treatment of people in care homes, school closures, all these kinds of things. This is what we should be criticising a government on, and, by the way, an opposition party, not this kind of relatively substanceless stuff of Partygate.
There's a hand up there in the middle. I can't quite see who it belongs to. Oh, yes, to you, yes. Yes. I think you've got your hand up, haven't you, with the pink hair?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Let's hear from you.
Can I just add that these things are going on and on and on because the opposition and any opposition party that we've got don't actually have anything else to say.
I'm really sorry, that's just not true. So, I mean, Ella says, why aren't we talking about some of those other things? We are. We have been banging on to the government about the cost of living crisis for months, with the result that after saying just the day before,
you weren't an opposition
just
during
the
the
day
pandemic.
before, the country wanted us to unite when we were in difficulty, but over the last 3 months, just the day before, they actually did a massive U-turn on the windfall tax and actually trying to help people out with their bills.
So why do you think that the woman there is not hearing you?
Well, I'm not going to argue with the fact you haven't heard it. Obviously, that's your truth. I get that.
But I watched Prime Minister's questions yesterday, and the only thing I got out of it was that Keir Starmer was calling Boris Johnson Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's all it was. And it was a joke that just went so long, it was unbelievable. So it bored us at the end.
PMQs is a half-hour part of the week. It's a tiny part of what we do. We've been challenging the government on their running down of the health service, of their treatment of education, of their utter lamentable failure on the policy of levelling up.
What's your other policies?
Do you want me to give you a Labour Party manifesto? Because I can give you a Labour Party political broadcast if Fiona wants us to.
I definitely don't want that. But simply, in terms of, I think you've addressed your point. As far as you're concerned, you've got policies, but you're not hearing them.
Yes.
Matt, I want to bring you back in, because obviously there has been support for the Prime Minister, there has been criticism of the Prime Minister too, and of you for supporting him.
Yep, I don't think anybody can box off the hurt that was felt by people during the pandemic. I didn't get into politics to do the pandemic, and actually, we talked about the Labour Party backing us during the pandemic on all the measures. They didn't turn up. There was a crowd of us who had the debate with our own government about what was happening while they were abstaining. But moving on to that, there was two questions out there. One was about what impression does this cast to the public? Well, the impression that's cast to the public is whatever is on the front page of the newspaper every week, isn't it? That's part of the problem. We're covering a story now that nobody knows any details about, and we're assuming things and casting aspersions. Actually, we don't know the details.
Hang on just a minute. Hang on just a minute. The reason we're covering it is because the Prime Minister's ethics advisor wrote a letter in strong terms, I think that is fair to say, when he describes it as being put in an impossible and odious position. The Prime Minister breached his own codes in the front, he wants no part in this. Do you think it shouldn't be reported?
People are sat here having to guess what's gone on, but actually there was a big question out there about why I supported the Prime Minister.
And also there's this audience here, we get the questions about half an hour before everyone tells us. There were lots of questions about this.
Right, well, I'm going to answer the other question that came out from the lady in the centre there who asked me why I supported the Prime Minister. And we all know the heartache that went on during the pandemic. It was awful. It was god-awful 2 years of everybody's life. There was youngsters who were, put through terrible situations at school. There was people who really suffered, people on the front line, the NHS, who had to give their lives for 2 years to this cause. I lost someone during the pandemic. I understand that hurt. But at the same time, I also didn't get elected to spend all of my time talking about birthday cake. And why I backed the Prime Minister, well, you would have us talk about it every week at the MPs. And actually, the reason I backed the Prime Minister is because when I entered politics and was elected in 2019, this country had been tearing itself apart over Brexit for years. He got it done. He moved us on. We then went into a pandemic, one of the toughest cards we could possibly be dealt. We could still be wearing masks now if it were not for the most effective vaccine rollout. The fastest vaccine. Not once, not twice, 3 times. 3 times. We emerged from that pandemic. And thanks to the support that the government gave during that pandemic, when it started, we thought there was going to be mass unemployment. We thought this country would be, with the dogs, absolutely battered and would be mass unemployment. Actually, employment's in a really good place. The economy is in a really good place because of the measures that were put in place.
What?
And that's why,
like you're in a good place?
Moreover,
hang on. When you say the economy is in a really good... Well, OK, you're doing a whole long list, but when you say the economy is in a really good place, there is a small issue.
There is jobs left, right and centre. We had the fastest growing economy in 2007 last year.
Pay their bills.
That's, I'm sure,
People
going to come
can't, and that's, of course, that's not the government's fault, but you want to take credit for other things which aren't the government's responsibility either. The scientists came up with the vaccine. People here, people across the country can't pay their bills. That's the long and the short of it.
We're going to come back to the cost of living.
That's the long and the short of it.
But on my answer to why I back the Prime Minister, as a Stocktonian, I can tell you about what's come to Stockton. We're doing very well. Jobs from the Treasury in London, up in Darlington, fantastic high-end jobs, opportunities for young people in our area. The UK's first and largest free port, creating 18,000
so everyone's
jobs
singing
on
and
our
dancing in the
doorstep.
streets.
Great jobs.
Are they really? So everyone's very grateful for that. So that's nice.
I can go on. We've got a big list.
Peace and love has broken out here on the panel, as you can see, and we've only been going about 20 minutes. I'm going to take another question, but before I do, just let me tell you where we're going to be next week, which is Stratford-upon-Avon, and the following week we'll be in Inverness. That's on the 30th of June. So if you'd like to come and be part of the audience, go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there and come and be part of the programme. OK, let's take another question now. From Denise Cresham.
Is the government's commitment to relocate illegal immigrants to Rwanda going to address the problem of people trafficking?
Alison.
No, it's not. It's going to cost an absolute fortune and it's not going to help in any way whatsoever. It really is quite abhorrent to take people who have come from war zones from all around the world, who perhaps have come here because they have family here. They want to reunite with the only people perhaps that they know that are still alive. And the government instead wants to put them on a plane and ship them to Rwanda, and they will never get to come back. And I think that is just the most abhorrent thing to do to vulnerable people, the most desperate people in the world. And I cannot believe that the government would go ahead with such an awful plan. And it won't fix the problem either, because most of the people that are coming over in those small boats, they're coming over because the only way you can claim asylum in this country is by getting here. You can't claim it from some other country except for very limited circumstances, such as the very limited number of people they've allowed through the Afghanistan scheme and the small numbers of people that have so far made it through the Ukraine scheme. So you have to get here to claim asylum in the first place. And there is no other mechanism to do that. And the government knows that and does nothing about that. And they have no interest in doing so, and so it seems.
Richard.
Look, you know, this is a horrific issue. It needs to be dealt with a lot of humanity. I think perhaps my kind of liberal gut instinct was that we shouldn't offshore our problems. But when you take a step back, the businessman in me knows that we've got to break the business model of the people traffickers who are trading on human misery and suffering. And actually, what is inhumane, what is shameless is what's happening today and yesterday and will happen tomorrow, which is allowing people to cross the channel overladen with women and children in unsafe boats, risking that crossing. I don't have any alternative solutions. Be interested to know if anyone else on the panel does. But in the absence of other solutions, I think this is obviously controversial. It's obviously a bold idea. But if it can happen in the numbers that the government are saying, then actually that would break the business model and it would stop something that has been happening for far too long, and we need to get a grip of it.
Okay. The man at the back there.
Hi, most of these people crossing the channel are young men looking for work, and all I'm going to say is when all these four-star hotels are full up, when the immigration centres are full up, where do we put these people? Where do we put these people? Because we're going through a crisis ourselves, and it seems to me the money spent on this problem is more money spent on them than it is on our own kind. And we can't keep on letting these people, like the woman on the panel says, the only reason how they can get in is coming across. That's inviting these people to come into this country. What are we going to do when it's all full and there's no room left? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And a safe place, and they're running away from France, they're running away from Spain, and they're coming over and risking their lives.
Let's just hang on a minute. We'll just get the microphone to you.
So, do we put them up in the four-star hotels? Do we?
Sorry, what are you trying to say? We couldn't hear you.
They're human beings, and
Yes.
we're forgetting that word. They're humans.
Yes, they are.
Escaping dreadful conditions.
What? Because they like our conditions. Because it's an easy touch. We are an easy touch. That's why there was 400 yesterday.
That's not working. OK. Let's hear from the man in the front here in the striped shirt.
What's the gentleman on the end said about women and children come across, I very rarely see that. It's middle-aged men under 40. Now, they're coming mainly, when they're crossing from Calais, they're coming from a country that's not at war. They've come through 7 or 8 different countries to get here to come across. And my question to the SNP person is, these people, that was 600 in the last 2 days, are you going to take them in? Where are you going to put them? I'm a humanitarian. I believe that people from Ukraine who are fleeing should come here, but people, just a second, people that have come across through 7 or 8 different countries to get here, and then they're coming across, risking their lives. Yes, I know about all the people that are paying, they have to pay 10,000 and all that, but they're risking their lives to come across a very busy channel, right? They're here now. Where are you going to put them?
So in my constituency in Glasgow Central, we've got the highest immigration caseload in Scotland. We have been the main resettlement place in Scotland for people, but every single Scottish local authority, every single one of them took people as part of the Syrian scheme because that was a good scheme, it was a funded scheme. What happens in the Home Office just now, the reason that people are being put in hotels is because the Home Office is underinvested in its staff. They can't process the claims that people are making, and they are stuck waiting in limbo for ages. If that wasn't the case, people could work, people could get on with their lives. Instead, they're being kept up in these hotels rather than being allowed to move on with their lives to contribute to the economy.
They could be rapists, murderers, everything. They're coming, you don't know who they are. They could be coming next year. Right, but check who they are, check. They don't even have documents.
I'll just put one fact in here, which is that 71% of applications, this is according to the Refugee Council, were granted asylum or protection at the initial decision stage. That's
where are the 600 that come in the last 2 days going to be housed?
OK, no, we hear what you have to say. The woman there in the glasses.
I'd just like to ask people who, have expressed views of, where we're going to put them and why should we have them, about how desperate, think about the most desperate situation that you could think of in this country, and how desperate would you have to be to leave this country and to flee and to go across Europe or wherever else. So I think we should bear in mind these people are human beings who are fleeing desperate situations, whatever they might be.
OK. Thangam.
So, will it work, was the question, I think, originally? Well, no. Because, first of all, it's fundamentally... Well, it's already not working. We've heard from several people...
It's only just started. It's only just started.
But the threat of it has been known about for some time, and we were told, when this plan was announced, that the mere threat of it would be enough to shut down the business model of the traffickers. It's not shutting down the business model of the traffickers, because the traffickers have nothing to lose by continuing to take money, whatever happens to the refugees at the other end. So it's not actually tackling the problem the government said they wanted to crack down on. Now, what they could do, if they wanted to crack down on people traffickers, which I don't see any evidence of, is not cut the National Crime Agency. They could set up assessment centres closer to centres of conflict so that assessments could be done rather than people making any crossings across Europe or as far as Calais. But fundamentally, I think this is an un-British thing to do because it's ruining lives and it's dumping people on another country, on a developing country.
So to the points that you're hearing from the audience, and this is a great thing because we actually have people here making their points, who are saying, well, where will we house these people? Where will we put them up? How will we find the money to do that? What's your answer to that?
Well, we're spending a fortune, by the way, not sending them to Rwanda at the moment. It is costing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds.
OK, but that's not answering their question.
Because what we're spending on hotels at the moment is because the Home Office is a government department in meltdown. I have people in my constituency who have applied for asylum. They may not be entitled to it, but they're sitting waiting for a decision which is at our own cost because we don't allow them to work. Now, if the Home Office would only get its act together and actually make decisions quicker and fairer, we'd be able to get rid of people who are not entitled to be here, and those who are entitled to be here would be able to get on with their lives and contribute and pay taxes and not be in hotels. But that's not what the question was about. The question was about the Rwanda plan. It's expensive, it's unworkable, and it's fundamentally un-British.
OK, the woman there in the glasses, yes, with the blonde hair.
I would like to know why the government isn't tackling the French authorities who are allowing these people to leave from the beaches and cross, but why aren't they?
I don't know.
OK, we'll ask Matt in a minute, and the man there in the suit with the white shirt and the glasses.
So I'm a member of the Tory party, but I actually agree with Thangam on this because
Now, that's interesting. So what's going on there?
So regardless of what you think about the policy itself, it's absolutely incompetence in the Home Office. Matt, you're a PPS, I think, in the Home Office. What on earth is going on? Regardless of the policy, this just strikes of incompetence, which is through and through in this government, in every single department.
Does this make you question your support for the Conservative Party?
The only reason I'm a member of the party now is to get rid of Boris Johnson.
I think one of my concerns about this entire debate is that when you take it down to its rawest form, so it's the most heated discussion we just had, and the problem is that people think one side thinks the other side is racist, one thinks is morally superior. Actually, we have a problem.
No one here has accused anyone of racism.
No, but that's where it gets to. That's where some of this debate gets to. It gets very heated and it goes, we have a problem. There is illegal groups, criminal groups, putting people on boats who are then risking their lives coming to the UK. That is not part of a modern, modern immigration system that we can, praise. We need to solve that problem. It has to be solved. We've been working with the French authorities. We've thrown a lot of money at the problem. We've put a lot of resource into it in France. It doesn't work. We've found a solution.
It's not a solution.
You haven't got a solution either, though, have you, Thangam?
OK, wait, let's let Matt answer, because he hasn't got
what we do. Well, actually, you know what? We made it an offence for these people, these traffickers, whether it's smugglers who bring people across. We made it an offence. The Labour Party wouldn't support that as a thing. They didn't support us giving life sentences to these horrible people smugglers who put people's lives on the line. We need to generate a response. This is a response. It's an effort to deter people from getting in that boat and coming across. And you know what? If we had that, if we had control of what was coming across, then maybe we'd be able to open more safe and legal routes. This country has a very proud history of helping people out when they're in need. 200,000 since 2015 from Syria, from Afghanistan. Do you know this?
And what about your fellow Conservative there, who says, what are you doing? The Home Office is in a mess. You're only in the Conservative Party to get rid of Boris Johnson, I think you said.
Absolutely. I was hoping Matt would have some courage and vote against Boris Johnson in the recent
confidence
vote. But clearly he's been made a PPS and everything like that. So maybe not.
Would you like to answer your?
I think, do you know what? We've actually had. When we talk about this Partygate and Boris and all that sort of thing, we put it in the box.
Well, this is talking about Home Office policy here. But
we can either talk about Boris and how he might want to be a party member to get rid of him.
OK, no, fair enough. Yeah.
The reality is that actually we've had the police investigation, we've had the Sue Gray investigation, we've got the privileges investigation. A lot of people now want to start talking about the real issues of the day, and they want to talk about what's been delivered for them.
It really is just a matter of time. If it wasn't this, what is it going to be? And it's just an embarrassment, frankly.
The Home Office is...
Ella, let's bring on the question, which is the government's commitment to relocate illegal immigrants to Rwanda going to address the problem of people trafficking?
No, I don't think it is. I think that I was amused by Justin Welby making the headlines for criticising the government, saying, a statement that I actually agreed with, that we were subcontracting out our responsibilities. And the important thing to know about the Rwanda policy is that it is not original by the Conservative government. One of the reasons why I was such a passionate voter for Brexit was because I was appalled by the European Union's immigration policy. In 2004, made a deal with Libya to basically keep migrants from crossing over, billions of pounds.
So the UK was part of it.
And Gaddafi threatened to turn Europe black, and so the European Union bunged them $5 million in order for that not to happen. Similar deals were made with Turkey, with Erdogan, in order to keep Syrian refugees from crossing over into Greece and Bulgaria. So the point, and Frontex have now, the EU border agency, took up the that sort of work of making sure that, talk about inhumane, pushing people back in the sea and things like that. So the point I'm making is that when politicians, who are not part of the Conservative Party, opine about the inhumanity of this, which, by the way, I tend to agree with, by and large. I want a more liberal approach to immigration policy, not a less one. You sort of, the double standards thing comes back up, and you wonder, why weren't you talking about subcontracting our responsibilities when it was the European Union doing it? But I also think that this question of, it's an important question of where are the resources going to come? And, both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in their manifestos in 2019 recognised people's desires to control borders in relation to the Brexit vote. And it now seems like talking about controlling borders is impossible. But I wouldn't let the government off the hook that easy, because the question of resources, whether it's housing or GP appointments or school places or anything like that, the question is, why aren't you building houses? Why aren't you hiring more GPs? Why aren't you building more schools? Not that this issue is going to be the crisis of resources in this country is going to be resolved by keeping 600 people away or putting them on a plane. So a better immigration policy, please, a commitment to controlling borders. But I think the people like me who want to have a more liberal immigration system need to start making the argument on a political basis rather than relying on these slight double standards of sort of un-Britishness and inhumanity.
Let's take another question from Anna. Anna Carr. Is that how I pronounce your surname?
It's Kerr, but don't worry about it. So my question is, the cost of living crisis is significantly exacerbating regional inequalities. Recent GDP shows a 2.3% growth in London, but a 1.2% decline in the North East. Levelling up is failing. How would Labour fix this?
Right, so you're directing your question to Labour. So, Thangam, you're here. How would you address this?
Right, well, first of all, this is a cost of living crisis. You're absolutely right, it is exacerbating regional inequalities. And you say exacerbating, that's because they already existed. And that's because there are parts of the country that, over the last 12 years in particular, the Conservatives have ignored and failed to care about. Now, they're in trouble now because now they're representing some of these seats. They actually have to start to say, oh, we're going to do something for you. Now, I'm afraid to say that the government's levelling up flagship policy as it was in 2019, it's already been shown up to be smoke and mirrors.
OK, the question is very deliberately, how would Labour fix this?
And I'm just about to tell you.
Well, do get on with that.
If Labour was in government, what the Tories could be doing instead, and what Labour would do instead, is first of all, we would have an emergency budget. We would start right now, because we are in an emergency. We would make sure that our tax policy worked for small businesses, which have suffered from years of terrible systems of business rates, so they're making people redundant or unable to trade, and that's where lots of people work. We would make sure as well that we had a tax policy that was fair, and so Rachel Reeves, who's our Shadow Chancellor, is reviewing every aspect of tax policy, but we would also make sure that there was investment in the renewable industry, which is going to be one of the great growth sectors of the future, so that those good, skilled, well-paid jobs would be coming to the North East, to South Wales, to parts of Scotland that have suffered as well from being left behind, to the South West, which I'm part of representing, where we have also great regional and in-region inequality. Investing in those jobs that also help us with our climate crisis, as well as with our jobs crisis, which we've got at the moment, in that Matt will probably tell you in a moment we've got record levels of employment. But we all know that we've got gaps in how we're running the country, because there are places where people can't get the jobs that they really want because they haven't got the right skills or they haven't had the right training. And then there are other parts of the supply chain that aren't working because they can't get the employees. Something badly wrong with how the economy is growing.
Anna, does that answer your question?
Rather failing to grow, I might say.
Anna, let me just come back to you quickly before I move around the rest of the audience. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you very, very much for that response. And I would now like to direct that response to the Conservative representative.
I'm going to sit right back. Marvellous. Marvellous.
Sorry, you can't catch a break.
Don't do me out of job quite yet. No. Hang on. Let me get round the rest of the audience, because they've also got something to say, and I want to hear that just as much. Yes, the man in front in the red and white top.
I think you're very well versed on what you're saying. Keir Starmer must have trained you well, because he rambles on like Ramblin' Sid Rumpole, but we never get a result.
He rambles on like what?
Ramblin' Sid Rumpole.
Okay, that's a new one.
He really is the last straw. The last leader of the Labour Party didn't do you any favours. I thought this man was going to be better. Unfortunately, he just rambles on telling stories, and there's no result, there's no solution. when you talk about we're going to get these people back, send them to Rwanda, what is his idea? What can we do with these people? Nobody wants to really write it off. But what you're saying there, it's just going on the way he does. To be quite honest, you don't solve anything. You don't give an alternative. And you're exactly like Keir Starmer.
That's the problem with this channel crossing debate.
Let me let Thangam have a quick response to that before I move on.
I was asked what Labour would do instead to solve the cost of living crisis, and I gave one detailed example. I can give plenty of others. I know Keir to be a fundamentally decent man who's hard-working, who's very bright, and all of the policies that I've already talked about this evening, about investment in renewables, about cracking down on the cost of living crisis, about reforming our tax policy, about making sure that the business rates that small businesses are currently crippled by are fair, and I'm getting nods to my left here, also some reforming the way that business rates work so that those online industries which benefit from tax breaks, frankly, which they shouldn't be benefiting from and are hurting our small high street businesses. There's any number of things which I've just listed you 6. I also listed 3 things that we could do, that the government could do about solving the plan to send people to Rwanda, which is fundamentally unworkable. So I have actually answered with several policies.
Richard, let's hear from you, because we're here in Newcastle, and the North East is an important area for you in terms of Iceland.
Yes, heartland, definitely. And we have 1,000 stores around the UK, and I travel around it every week. And some of our customers might only have 25 quid a week to spend on food, and they were struggling before the cost of living crisis. It keeps me up at night in terms of how some of our customers are going to cope going forward. So this is a real issue, and you're right, regionally it's more unequal, of course, particularly in the UK. For me, levelling up is not about big, grandiose infrastructure projects like HS2. It's about the politics of the everyday, the ordinary, the cancelled bus routes. Yes, it's about jobs and investment and connectivity, but it's about civic pride and a sense of ownership in the place that you're from. And I see this in the stores that I visit, that lack of pride, civic pride, is declining. So it's about people feeling proud of where they're from as well.
And what do you think should be done?
I think certainly businesses can do more. We work day and night to try and keep food as affordable as possible, but as you all know, it's going up. But we're trying a lot, freezing £1 lines. We're launching 3 products for 3p this weekend, 15% off for our staff, 10% for over 60s, loads of stuff. But we can do more, and we will not rest until this cost of living crisis is over. In terms of the government, well, actually, I do actually agree with Thangam that if we look at our high streets, it should alarm us all, and this isn't just self-interest arguing for business rate reform. Retail is the largest private sector employer, but also it's about the sense of place, community. They're the fabric of our societies. And I say this as one of the biggest online retailers in the UK. I think we need root and branch reform, which the government have said that they'll look at. So let's speed it up. Let's get to it. Let's start charging online sales tax and take away this historic taxation from bricks and mortar retailers, which is crippling our high streets and therefore affecting our communities.
Man there with the pink shirt.
The Labour Party talk a good story, but they've got no real alternatives. They haven't been in power for over 13 years. And when you come to the next general election, you'll still be in opposition because you've got no solutions whatsoever.
OK, I think Thangam feels... Now, I'm going to come to a minute. I need to get around the audience as well. Yes, the man at the back there with the glasses and the blue shirt. Yes.
I'd just like to say that the lad at the front there where he said he's joined the Conservative Party to get rid of Boris Johnson. I was in the Royal Navy for over 3 years. I never once joined a ship to try and get rid of the captain. I think there should be...
Ella.
I think that, in terms of the cost of living crisis, yes, Rishi Sunak has recently given out, a significant amount of money. They talk about emergency budgets. We hear, there's a lot of
specifically about levelling up.
OK, yeah, but the context is we've had a lot of crowing about, the success of windfall taxes and all that kind of thing. But levelling up was supposed to mean something substantial in relation to not just sticking plasters about to fix the economy, but fundamental things like investment in infrastructure, investment in R&D, investment in, jobs, building houses, putting bricks to the ground, like things you can hold in your hand. And it's quite clear that the government, yes, they use the pandemic as an excuse, and yes, they use the war in Ukraine as an excuse, and it's always something going on that means that their hands are tied. But it's quite clear that that levelling up agenda has amounted to very little in terms of changes for people's lives in the North East or in other parts of the country, changes in wages. Talk about, the high level of jobs in this country. I mean, everybody knows that the quality of the jobs is the thing that's in question. There's been a lack of secure jobs, the people on 0 hours contracts. All this thing doesn't amount to a wonderful, rosy, fantastic economy. But then you have to ask, the question was about the Labour Party, and you have to ask what an opposition can offer to solve this. And the policies that the Labour Party have, particularly in relation to something like house building, are really not hugely different from a Conservative government. And this is a Conservative government that can't even meet its own targets. And on the key, you have across the country now, coming up next week, and maybe people will be divided on this, working people, labouring people, working class people, going out on strike because they're deciding that there is nothing else that they can do, and they have to show their employers and indeed their government that something has got to give here. And will the Labour Party support that? No. So what can you do?
The woman there in the floral top, yes.
Hello, yeah, I'd just like to say I'm a volunteer at one of the busiest food banks in the country, Newcastle.16 Food Bank. And in recent months, just as a volunteer, I only do 1 shift a week, but I've seen more and more people in full-time employment. Sometimes they're in nurses' uniform coming to collect food parcels. And something is dreadfully wrong when people's full-time wages isn't sufficient for them to be able to afford to live well, to affordably feed their families. I just think it's shocking. It's something fundamentally needs to be done about it.
So when people come along who are in full-time employment, you say they're wearing a nurse's uniform and things.
Yeah.
What are they saying to you?
They're actually embarrassed. They're ashamed to be using a food bank. It's often the first-time users. They've never had to do this before. And it's like, but we always say, we don't judge needs most. Take the food that we can give you and use that income you've saved on heating your home, paying your bills, keeping yourself out of debt, whatever it takes, really. So, yeah, but, there's a full spectrum of people who access our services, and we provide debt advice as well. And it's just, the numbers are going up. I've seen, even in the time I've been there, I do a shift on a Wednesday morning. We were averaging about 75 households in a 4-hour window period, and it's now up to over 100. Right. And that's in a few short months.
So, Matt, as Anna wanted to direct the question to you as well, the cost of living crisis is significantly exacerbating regional inequalities. Recent GDP shows a 2.3% growth in London, but a 1.2% decline in the North East. Levelling up is failing. So, Labour's been asked how they fix it. I've
sat here very well behaved and very quiet. But
well, that's because everyone has a turn, Matt, in fairness,
yes,
and now it's yours.
So, first thing about business rates. Do you know what Labour's plan is on business rates? They're going to replace them with a commercial property tax. Smells like business rates to me. But actually on business rates, if you are a small business, £110,000 rateable value, your rates this year have been cut by 50%. It's progress. It's a lot more progress than we've had for several decades.
Do you agree with that, Richard?
Sorry.
Were you listening? Do you agree with that?
Business rates are a hugely disproportionate cost for us, and they are increasing year on year on year.
Okay.
More progress this year than ever before, 50%.
Yeah, but for smaller businesses, and actually that will help the corner shops and the small businesses, and that's great. But actually, where the vast bulk of the employment is, it doesn't help us, and that's why we need. Actually, whilst I'm at it, how about
hang on, I need him to answer the question.
A price cap on energy for business as well.
Anyway. But the question is about
as expensive it was called a commercial property.
Since we have a business person here, I thought I'd ask him. But the question is, or the point Anna's making is levelling up is failing.
So, you are all very welcome to come down to Teesside, where I will show you levelling up in action. We've already talked about the fact that we've got Treasury jobs, amazing job. When I was at school, so I grew up in Stockton, Labour control, by and large, on the council, places like Redcar that have been Labour, Darlington, Labour for a very long time. And they changed their mind this time, and they changed their mind because they didn't think that Labour was delivering for them locally. Lots of other issues. But actually, for me, and what I've seen since I got elected, has been huge. There's a pinch point on the A19 that causes masses of traffic every day and is an economic hamper to our part of the world. £100 and some million being invested in that. New train station on its way. We'd given up on our airport in Teesside. The Tories have fixed it. We're actually investing because levelling up, it's about hooking up the parts of our economy that can do more. whether that be that free port, the UK's biggest and first free port in Teesside, 18,000 jobs. These are good jobs, good engineering jobs in that green renewable sector. I've got a town deal in Thornaby, a town with a lot of pride that is now looking at its town centre, getting rid of skanky, horrible buildings that have been sat there empty for years. We're installing a new training hub, which will let youngsters get great engineering jobs. You can come to Teesside and I will personally invite you all to come and look at my new train station, my new training hub for young people who are going to get great jobs. And you can have a look at what we're doing in the High Street.
OK, no, we hear you, we hear. I just see that the woman here has put her hand up. So you live in Stockton?
I don't live in Stockton anymore, but I was born and raised in Stockton, and my mum still lives there. But Boots on Stockton High Street is just closed down, I think, one of the widest high streets in the country, and you cannot get people other than a charity shop to open on the high street.
I'll tell you what.
Well, hang on, just let
you know, from what I recall when I go and see my mother, that you had investment on Wellington Square, which is at the top of the high street. There, you can't get people to, you know, even your big businesses like Debenhams closed at the top there. One of the things that you probably have got that's been recently quite good is the Globe has opened, which has been, I think, Stockton Council put a huge amount of investment in that, which I believe is Labour controlled and not Conservative, if I remember rightly.
So yes, it's slightly more mixed picture there. But let me come to Alison. Sorry, I'm sorry, I just need to bring Alison because she's not managed to get a word in edgeways so far.
Yeah, I mean, the Conservatives' approach to levelling up is let's build a great big shiny thing so we can cut a ribbon on it, rather than the fundamental change that you need to actually make a difference in local economies. You need to look at the housing, you need to look at the infrastructure, you need to look at the train links, for example. So we've got the Elizabeth line opening in London, yet another big shiny rail line for London, and the north of England goes without. That's not going to make the fundamental changes that you need to make sure that people can live here, work here, invest here, that they don't have to travel away to London to go and start their careers or do their education, that you can make a success of yourself right here in your local community. And that's what's missing from the government's plan. It's no strategy, no joined up means of looking at all of this together. It's a big shiny thing and nothing really of any great substance underneath it. And without that, you're not going to make the real change that needs to happen.
OK. Woman here in the front, and almost at the front. Well, actually, the woman in the front, sorry, in the stripy shirt, then I'll come to you behind, yes.
I'm not actually a Conservative supporter by no means, but I actually live in Blythe Valley. And the one thing I would say, I've seen some levelling up there because they've just introduced a disused railway line linking Ashington, the former mining community, running through Blythe to Newcastle. So I would applaud them for that. Not a lot of other things, but I will say that they have started where I live, putting their plans into action.
OK, and the woman behind you.
I just wondered, Matt, what you thought about what the woman behind me was talking about in terms of the food bank in Newcastle. I know that you just passed over that really quickly when the question came to you. I just would like you to address her point.
By all means.
Yep. Can I do the roundup, though? We've got a Stockton question back at me.
Briefly.
So on Stockton High Street...
But that as well, please.
On Stockton High Street, there's 16.5 million coming there. Hopefully you can persuade your mum to sign a petition that's going to bring a new community diagnostic hospital to Stockton, which I'm campaigning for at the moment. Huge investment in Stockton. The Labour Council had a role in putting Wellington Square together, etc. But 16.5 million of government money. New diagnostic hub.
Government's money, it's actually the taxpayers.
Hang on.
It is taxpayers' money,
but
it's coming north. It's coming north.
Would you like to answer the woman there as well, please?
Yeah, around food bank usage. Do you know what?
The increase in food bank usage specifically.
The cost of living crisis is a nightmare. I speak to people every week about what's happened to the... It's not a UK phenomenon that prices on oil and gas and electric are going up and are going through the roof in a way we would never, ever have wanted to see them. It is painful, and every day I speak to people who are suffering that. One of the big things, though, is that money is your money. So the government does not have government money in a blank chequebook. What we give to support people, we've got to take from somebody else or take at some point in the future. So there is a balancing act there. There is support going in for the most vulnerable in the best way that we can, but we've got to manage that, haven't we? Some of the most vulnerable families will get £1,600 extra via rebates, via winter fuel allowance, to try and help. But you know, it's very tough out there, and the best we can do is support those who are most in need.
OK,
Can I just say, was there not a food plan announced on Monday, and did the government not take on its own advisers' chief recommendations, one of which was to increase the number of children who could access free school meals by something like about 1.5 million children, and if not more, and they've just decided not to do that at all?
OK. Richard, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, just back to the lady's comment on Boots closing down. We might look at that because we're opening 30 shops a year. However, all we want to do... All other shops are available. All we want to do is open shops, create jobs and pay tax. And yet every single one of our 30 shops is delayed in terms of the new store openings because we have this sclerotic planning system. And I think a really good suggestion for Labour, Conservatives or anyone else is just to resource up our local planning departments because they're overwhelmed with applications, and that's why we have such a delay in the system, which is hampering us to create jobs.
The woman here in the front.
I've used Iceland shopping for quite a while and had deliveries. My sister lives in Shipley down in Yorkshire, and the Yorkshire branch have stopped the free deliveries because of the extra fuel costs. Now, how is that fair?
I love this. So this is good for you. Good for you.
Yeah, good for
this
you.
is a political programme. Come on, Richard.
I'll speak to you afterwards. I will speak to you afterwards. We haven't cut any deliveries because of fuel costs. We've actually increased our deliveries 5 times, and actually shoppers are now using it as opposed to driving themselves to shops to save on fuel. It may be for other reasons, but I'll speak to you afterwards.
There you go. You're going to get personal service from the managing director of Iceland. Come on. Man there in the pink shirt.
Yeah, we've been talking about levelling up for a little bit here. But levelling up itself has only been kind of going for, what, the last maybe 3-4 years? The one thing that is politicians and governments, and successive governments, yeah, they don't seem to have a long-term strategy. That's why our roads were never great, because you can have a Labour government in for 8 years or 10 years, and a Conservative for another 10, 15 years, and everyone's got short-term promises, right? Which doesn't help.
Conservative government for some considerable
of course.
time.
It doesn't help. It doesn't help what you were there. What they're there to serve in the first place is have some long-term plans that benefit the whole country and not your party. Yeah, it's for the people, and I think levelling up. That was the idea. It was trying to level up the north and the south, because it has been an issue for a long, long time.
And are you feeling that it's coming?
Yes, it is. Yes, of course it is. Yeah, I think that there's some in Newcastle. They're starting to bring some city centre jobs in, government jobs. I think that the BBC and people like that actually have started to, rather than be institutionalised in London, of starting to push out into the wider economy, yeah? And I think that was the whole idea of the levelling up, is to take some of not just the private sector, but also the government and make them share out the distribution a bit better.
We've only got about a minute left.
Yeah, just, you know, I think the levelling up is important to talk about, but it's also important to put it in the context of the wider question of the British economy. And, you know, no one is going to turn the nose up at 65 million or whatever it was put in different places, and that's, you know, that's to be commended, and more of that, please. But you have to look at the broader picture. I'm glad someone raised the question of a long-term plan, because this economic crisis that we're currently living through has been long in the making, and it's not going to go away at the end of this year. It's not going to go away at the end of next year or 5 years, unless the government commits to not just, you know, very laudably or whatever, flinging bits of money here, there and everywhere, but having a general plan for increasing production and kick-starting the economy in some kind of fashion. So if you look at something really central like housing, which, you know, if you're going to level up a place, it's not just about reopening Boots or things like that. It's also about, are people going to want to stay living there because there's affordable housing, there's decent housing, there's enough of it. The government's target is 300,000 houses a year. Michael Gove brought in to be the new kind of housing guru, but this is really important. His big announcement on housing is, oh no, sorry, we're not going to meet the target this year. Sorry about that. But we've got some shiny policy around referendums with homeowners. So, you know, on a fundamental level, the government cannot get its head around the fact they're having a long-term plan to do something radical with the economy.
OK, and you're taking your breath as well, Matt, but I'm afraid we are out of time. I'm so sorry you had your hand up. Our hour is up. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to the audience for coming along and being so lively and engaging. And, Madam, you will get your question answered about Iceland, which is absolutely fantastic. And, of course, thank you very much to you at home for watching from Question Time in Newcastle. Bye-bye.